Today we're going to walk through the driver experience for Digital Fleet's DVIR. I'll show you how to sign off on a previous DVIR, how PreTrip TBI works, what happens when you set the requirements on tests and components, how to modify in-progress DVIRs, how to view past DVIRs, and how to submit them. Starting off, we have to sign off on our previous DVIR. This happens during the login process, so let's start that. You can see here it automatically loads in the previous DVIR, and taking a look at it, we can see that there are no issues with any components and none of the tests have failed. So technically the driver doesn't even have to sign off on this. They could just click OK and continue on to the next step in the process. So let's take a look at what this process looks like when there are issues. This is a DVIR where the previous driver indicated there was a problem with a non-critical component, as you can see up here in the top right corner summary. If I scroll down a bit, I could see the component they were talking about was the body, and that they said that there was a large dent in the hood. Now, at this point, the driver could either consider the vehicle unsafe to operate or sign off on the DVIR. If I click Sign DVIR, I'm greeted with a message here that says that I've read the reports and I acknowledge that all the required repairs have been performed. So I could either sign off or hit cancel. I'm going to hit cancel so that we could see what happens when I click Vehicle is unsafe to operate. At this point, the driver's warned that the vehicle is unsafe to operate, and if they click yes, it will log them out. So I'm going to click yes here, and you can see I'm automatically brought back to the login page. So now let's take a look at the final screen and what it looks like when a critical test or critical component has failed. As a reminder, when a critical component has an issue or a critical test fails, that vehicle requires mechanic attention before it can be driven again. So when I log in now, we're going to see what that situation looks like for a driver. First thing you could see is that we get a pop-up letting the driver know that the vehicle condition was unsatisfactory and that it had a critical issue. In this case, it failed its drum rotation test. Now, the driver has two options here. They're either forced to log out or they can close this pop-up so they can get a look at the entire report. First thing you could see is that there is no mechanic signature on this. This is why the driver can't sign off. So we're going to force the driver to log out at this point. So they have to click Vehicle is unsafe to operate, they have to log out, and at that point, they have to contact the mechanic and let them know that their vehicle still needs attention. Now, after this, let's move on to the pre-trip DVIR flow. A pre-trip DVIR is a way to have drivers verify their vehicles before their day begins and happens during the login process. This screen shows a typical configuration with tests, measurements, and components. Looking at the test, we have a simple pass-fail input, as well as the description of the test, an indicator on how critical the test is, and an info button, where if I click on it, we'll see that we provide the longer, more detailed description, which probably gives instructions to the driver on how to do the test. We'll close this here and we'll start performing some of these. So let's do the brake test. Let's say it passed. And then we're going to go down to the horn test and we're going to fail it. When you fail it, you're prompted to add more remarks to give the mechanics an idea of why it failed. So let's say the horn was weak. Click submit. And there we have it. Failed test, horn was weak. Now I'm going to show what happens when a test is required for saving. If a driver wants to continue here, but the test is marked required for save, they're going to be told that it's required to continue. This will force the drivers to perform certain tests during certain times. So we're going to pass the drum rotation test. Measurements are only slightly different than tests, the main difference being the input. As you can see here, it's a numeric input instead of a pass-fail input. But basically everything else is the same. You still have the short description. You still have an info button that gives the longer description. If we scroll down here, let's say we fill out tire pressure, give it a 105, hit save, and then try to continue. As you can see, much like with tests, you can have required measurements as well. In this particular case, we want the odometer to be filled out pre-trip by the driver so that we could give the mechanics like a better idea of how many miles that vehicle drove today. So let's say it's a fairly newer vehicle. Let's just give it 100 miles. Hit save. You can see that the warning cleared. And we can continue on to components. The component step will show the driver the entire list of components that are configured for this truck class. They don't have to exhaustively go through them, they just need to choose the component that they know has issues. The layout here is very similar to tests, where it has a description, a critical indicator, and an info button. The only main difference between it and tests is that the components are divided up amongst their equipment types. So you can see up here, these are the truck equipment components. Going a little bit lower, we have the mixer components, and so on. Let's indicate that there's an issue with something, say the clutch. As you can see, when you click on clutch to indicate the issue, it does prompt the driver again to give more details so the mechanic has a good idea of why there's a problem with the clutch. Let's say it was hard to shift into third gear. And submit. After doing this, we can move on to the summary step. In the summary step, the driver is given a breakdown of the entire DVIR they just started. This includes how many tests were completed, as well as their outcomes, the measurements that they completed, and any components that they indicated had any issues. This is also the spot where the driver can add other remarks. So let's say we click on that, and the driver wants to tell the mechanic this should be looked at soon. Hit submit, and there we have it. The remarks have been added to the DVIR. At this point, the driver is given a couple of options. They could either mark the vehicle as unsafe to operate, which will submit a DVIR indicating that, and log the driver out, as you can see here. If I click no here, the other option that you have is indicating that the condition of the vehicle is satisfactory and saving a draft. So let's do that and finish the login. Let's say you wanted to edit your in-progress DVIR. It's pretty straightforward. Click on Menu, and then here we have a DVIR option. And there's an Edit in Progress DVIR button. If you click on that, it brings you to a list where you can look at either the tests you performed, the measurements you took, or the components. If you click on one of those, and let's say it turns out the clutch is fine, you can uncheck that, indicating it's not an issue anymore. Hit continue, and then you're brought to the same summary screen we saw just a few seconds ago. At that point, you hit Save Draft, and it's updated your components entry for your DVIR. Let's say you or one of your drivers wants to see the history of the DVIRs for this truck. It's also pretty easy. There's a button right here, View DVIR History. When you go into it, you get a list of all the DVIRs that have been submitted for the truck. If you click on View, you can get a breakdown of it, showing all the tests that may have passed or failed, the components, whether or not it's been signed off by a mechanic, and what the general remarks were. Scrolling down, you could see any components that had any issues or any tests that failed, and also the measurements that were taken. Now it's the end of the day for your driver, and they want to submit their DVIR. We have that actually baked into our logout logic. So we'll go back here, and we'll click on Menu Logout and the Logout button. You'll see that it loads in the DVIR that we started on our pre-trip with all the tests that we had performed. We're going to continue. Same thing with measurements. We're going to continue here. And this is where you see a required to submit being enforced. We want the post-trip odometer so that the mechanics have a good idea of how many miles that truck went that day. So let's fill that out. And now we've cleared that issue with the required to submit. Hit continue. None of the components had any issues, so we're going to continue. And we're brought to a summary that looks a lot like the pre-trip summary. The condition of vehicle satisfactory, I'm going to keep it that way, and I'm going to submit it. The driver's given a heads up that they are about to submit their DVIR, so they have to click yes to confirm. At that point, the DVIR gets submitted and it logs them out. That was the walkthrough for the driver experience for Digital Fleet DVIR. I showed you how to sign off previous DVIRs, how PreTrip DVIR works, what happens when you set the testing component requirements, how to modify in-progress DVIRs, how to view past DVIRs, and how to submit them. This video is part of a series on our DVIR product, so check back on our other videos to find out more information on how to best utilize DVIR from Digital Fleet. Also, be sure to check out our other videos for great information on all the Digital Fleet offers. Thanks for watching.